I call Materia Ture.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Green Party will maintain its opposition to this legislation, and I want to acknowledge the work of Holly Walker, who is currently on maternity leave, the Green Party MP who holds our housing portfolio, for her work on the Select Committee and particularly for the drafting of the minority report that is attached to the bill. And so I just want to go through some of the provisions and issues that she has raised in that minority report, but also to remind the country that just earlier this year, less than 12 months ago, the Green Party released a significant housing policy that was designed expressly to deal with the issues of affordability. It's not a build program, it's a program of support. Affordability, to increase and improve the affordability for families to purchase their own home, to improve the quality of New Zealand's homes, and to improve the security of tenure for New Zealanders living in homes. Now that proposal, called Home for Life, included 3 provisions. One of them was the progressive ownership policy, which is very similar to a UK government-sponsored scheme over there, and the Minister referred to UK examples of housing in his speech on this legislation. The progressive ownership is a shared equity scheme where government, in partnership with other organisations, iwi and community organisations, social housing organisations, together build homes and continue with a persistent and consistent home building program in New Zealand. And that some of those homes are set aside for state housing, some of those homes are set aside for management and social housing. Some of them, for example, under Labour's scheme, it might be sold directly to New Zealanders, but a proportion would also be set aside for the progressive ownership scheme, where people could slowly, over time, buy their own home. They would enter an agreement with the government agency that manages that. They would pay a small amount that's effectively a rent, which pays for the cost of the capital for the building of that home, and every week a little bit extra. And so every week they are paying a little bit extra to purchase the home. It's kind of like the old Māori Fes home loans, state advances. Many of us were raised in homes where our parents bought those homes by capitalising on the family benefit, very much that kind of scheme, where the government is building an investment, they are investing in families, and they are providing to New Zealand families their low cost of borrowing so that all New Zealanders can have access to that. And it's a way for people to build their own homes. In the UK, those homes continue through the affordability scheme so that they are reused for families just like those first families if they eventually want to move on. And so these are the kinds of policy ideas that need to be incorporated into New Zealand's housing law and regulation. But they are completely ignored by this government, because the government's sole intention, and it's represented here in this bill, is to remove itself from social housing. It's not to facilitate social housing. It's not to increase social housing or improve social housing. Its sole intention is to retreat from social housing. And it is doing so in a way that's full of spin. So this legislation today that we are discussing sets up a system whereby the state housing that the state currently manages will be slowly moved over into the community sector. And instead of building a collaborative relationship between government and the community sector, or government and iwi, a collaborative relationship where more housing is built, more affordable housing is built between all of the players, government is building in a competitive environment where organisations will have to compete with each other for access to resources to improve housing affordability and build more housing. And this is at a time when we have a housing crisis, when we know that there are at least 90,000 too few homes in this country for the population, and that number is getting bigger as population grows, but fewer homes are being built. We know that more and more New Zealanders are unable to buy their homes. And actually, you know what, those New Zealanders, those ones tend to be the middle class. The poor have always had real difficulty owning their own homes, but the middle class, the home ownership rates for the middle class is plummeting, and it's plummeting because supply is so restricted. And so instead of building a collaborative relationship between the state and community and iwi, this government is building a competitive one so that they can get out of the market because they don't believe that they have any responsibility for this core piece of infrastructure. Because the Green Party believes that housing is core infrastructure. It is no less core infrastructure than the roads that we drive on, than the telephone wires that we use to communicate, and the water pipes that bring us clean, fresh water. Housing is a human right. And a decent society, a wealthy society like our own, a first world society like our own, should have as its core, one of its core principles, that every single family in this country will be decently, safely, warmly, affordably housed. That's not an outrageous principle to have. That's, well, I'm afraid so, Mr. Prasad. I'm very disappointed that that is the case. That such a basic principle, that every New Zealand, every family in this country is entitled to be decently, warmly, safely housed, is somehow a principle that the national government will not accept. They do not believe in this principle. That is why they are retreating from social housing, why they are, through this legislation, removing from Housing New Zealand all social responsibility for housing, why they are building a competitive model for affordable house building, and why they are refusing to deal with the most core issues that affect housing affordability in this country and housing supply. A capital gains tax is one of those issues that this government has absolutely refused to consider, even though they know that it is one part of an economic tool that needs to be put in place if we are to improve housing affordability for New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, one of the major issues in this legislation is the reviewable tenancies. So a few years ago, the government put in place reviewable tenancies where new state housing tenants would be subject to a 3-yearly review of their tenancy. It has not yet been 3 years. It has not been yet tested to see whether the renewable tenancy program already in place is making any beneficial difference to those families who are the most vulnerable and the most in need of social housing. And yet, despite the complete lack of evidence about this and the effect of it, whether it's good or whether it's bad, the government is intending to roll it out to all state house tenants across the country. And what this does is it creates fundamental instability for the housing of families. A family who is in very vulnerable circumstances, and I have a case myself at the moment where a family, suffers from a serious illness that will eventually kill him. She has been working, but just recently lost her job, made redundant. They have a 6th child that they care for, and 2 children of their own, one of whom has a severe disability. These are the families that we should be prioritising. They are vulnerable families, and they are doing their very best. We are very hopeful that with some intervention we may be able to make sure that she has a decent house. But why should she have to rely on the intervention of a Member of Parliament to get what she is entitled to, which is decent housing as a member of our community, as a member of our family? She should not have to struggle. But if she gets a state house, 3 years' time, she's going to have her tenancy reviewed. She will have no security that she will have a home to live in, to raise her kids and take care of her husband for the time that she needs it. And why shouldn't she have that? Why should she not be entitled to that security and that decency? Because government wants to spend all its money on building motorways and not building homes. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to oppose this legislation. There are serious reforms that could be made to improve housing affordability for New Zealanders, particularly for our most vulnerable families. This legislation will drive more and more of those families into the ground, more and more of those families into poverty and into insecurity. We are opposed to this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Heatley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this legislation, the social housing reform.